is just...
Whilst you may have expected yet another defeat on the road, you probably weren't expecting a prompt start from the Green and White podcast brought to you by Argyle Life. That's because Sam's not here. So while Sam's not here, let's revel in the ability to be punctual. Good evening. Welcome to another probably more somber edition of the podcast. Usual stuff. Let's get that out of the way. Like, comment, subscribe. Get involved in the show. It is interactive. We will be looking for your questions and points as we go along. There is plenty to discuss. Joining me this evening, I'm actually the only one coming to you live from the West Country this evening. We've got a predominantly London-based show for you. Below me on the screen, Nick, or as more commonly known as the Argyle analyst on X. Nick, are you well?
I'm Blue Sky.
And Blue Sky, sorry, mustn't forget Blue Sky.
Yeah, I'm great. Well, yeah, I'm about as well as all of us, I suppose. How are you?
James, of One Team in Devon fame, are you well?
I'm as well as can be. Strangely numb was all I could say. I can't even feel angry.
Yeah, it's got to that stage, isn't it? John, rocking the festive setting this evening. I presume you're well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I was going to give the same trite answer as the other two have already offered about being as well as can be in the circumstances. So yeah, I'll say that I'm well, feeling Christmassy. I'm surprised that you managed to mention that we were all in London without doing your favourite Neil Warnock quote to go in with it. So I'd like to request that before we continue, please.
We're in London, aren't we? That's the fucking difference. Anyway, while you're unmuted, John, keep yourself on mute. Talk us through Saturday afternoon at Ashton Gate.
Yeah. So it fell to me to do the walkthrough of the Norwich game. I guess I'll be doing the walkthrough of the Bristol City game, although I'll be the second person to do the walkthrough of the Bristol City game after Victor Paulson, I think. Look, we started off and we actually played all right for 45 minutes or so. Obviously, it wasn't a vintage first half performance by any measure, but by our standards away from home, it was it was definitely up there with probably the best we've managed to produce this season. Joe, I think it was you messaged around. I can't remember if you actually messaged at halftime or at full time saying if we're all sort of praising that first half performance, it doesn't really bode well because that was extremely bog standard at best. I think I said something to.
I think it was in response to Sam Down's comment of this is broadly a massive improvement or something along those lines. And I just wanted to know what possible metric he was judging, other than the fact the opposition hadn't scored, that was an improvement.
Yeah, I mean, like gout is an improvement on having your leg chopped off, I guess. But no, that's a little unfair on the first half performance in the sense that I actually thought it was okay. I mean, if you go away from home in the Championship and you're a struggling side, and you go to a team that are, top 10, 11, 12, and you put in a performance like that, you wouldn't comment on it as being particularly bad. You might say, we sort of stayed in the game. They had most of the ball and most of the running seemingly, but we didn't really create any chances. But yeah, I felt we were more positive. I felt we played higher up the pitch, or at least intended to, compared to Tuesday, when obviously we got hemmed in very quickly. And we limited them to not too many chances. Obviously, Grimshaw has kept us in the game with some excellent saves. There was that incredible triple save, which I really think he deserves credit for. Obviously, it wouldn't have counted in the end because it was correctly flagged offside. But the third save where he gets up off the deck and sort of touches it over the bar from that effort, which was sort of facing an open goal and very, very close, but from a tight angle. I mean, that's a magnificent save. I feel like Grimshaw maybe copped a little bit of criticism in recent games, but I think that was a good reminder of what he can bring beyond, playing out with his feet. It was an excellent stop, a very agile stop. And so we go into halftime thinking maybe we can hold on to this, or maybe we could even go on and nick it. Wasn't overly impressed with Bristol City. And then we imploded. They piled on the pressure early in the second half. We, again, thanks to Grimshaw and some last-ditch defending, kept the score to 0-0. But then they scored a goal, and it reminded me a bit of the Leeds game in the sense that it's a bit of a lucky goal, right? That breaks the deadlock. Obviously, the one at Leeds that broke the deadlock was a screamer from 25 yards, but then they had a couple of goals that, you know, ricocheted off our defender to one of their strikers. This was kind of like that, you know, it sort of hits Twine and bounces in. But any sort of feeling that it was unlucky to concede it from a sort of how the goal looks point of view, sorry, it was offset by the fact that it was coming, I think. And at that point, you just want to stay in the game. You want to keep things tight, and you want to see if you can kind of grow into it and nick an equaliser. And yeah, we just didn't do it. We completely collapsed like a deck of playing cards, as we have done over and over and over again away from home this season. The second goal, the defending is just absolutely criminal from both Paulson and Houghton. I mean, Paulson is, I think I would have put in more of a challenge than that, and I don't think that's much of an exaggeration. Just totally stands off, not any effort at all to get a block in. It's a good finish from Wickham's Anis Mehmeti, who, along with MK Johns' Scott Twine, of course, were the ones to punish us. But yeah, you know, and then after that, the game is gone. The third goal is also an absolute shambles. I think it comes from our own counter-attack, where we actually were sort of playing forward quite well, and then they just nicked the ball back off us, broke up the other end and scored. And the fourth, I mean, we'd given up by the time Sinclair Armstrong ran through to slot in a nice finish. I think, you know, Norwich beating Luton 4-2 yesterday at home made me feel just a smidgen better about Tuesday night. Like, you know, I think Norwich actually are a good team who are streaky, and when they're on it in an attacking sense, they are on it. So while a 6-1 defeat is never acceptable, and obviously we went through all of the reasons that game was a complete disgrace on Wednesday's pod, I do think that Norwich are a team that have the potential to be in the top 6. Bristol City, with respect to them, are a bang average mid-table side at this level, and we make them look like prime Barcelona, just like we made Norwich look like prime Barcelona in that last half an hour. It's an embarrassment, and yeah, it's got to stop.
Nick, why don't you follow up after that? Anything that any more flesh you can add to the bones to what John's just said, particularly about that such a wildly improved first half, as social media would have us believe?
I mean, I think John summed it up pretty well. There's not really much to add. The first half was comparatively better because of what we're comparing it to. We still, you know, didn't really create much. I don't know. I didn't think Bristol City created that much, and yet they still had the offside goal. You know, the triple chance that could have gone at any point until the offside flag went up. That near post header. There's just, like you said, there was a bit of luck in the first goal, but it reminded me a bit of something on one team in Devon. While we had Foster, if you remember, where there was a bit about us conceding lots of goals from long shots. To which my response was, well, if you sit deep and let a lot of these high quality players, basically other teams, Whittaker's, I know Whittaker hasn't done it in a while, but if you let them keep having long shots, then eventually they're going to start to find them, particularly if they're not under pressure. And that's broadly what happened. I mean, you look at that, I can't remember which goal it was, but the one that was awfully defended by Paulson, when he's just backing up, and it's curled into the bottom corner. Is it Twine? Is it Mehmeti? I honestly, it all sort of went into a blur for me. I stopped thinking about Bristol City and was thinking more about big picture. But if you watch, there's just no pressure on the ball. He's got all the time in the world to like actually pick his spot and find the bottom corner. And yeah, we didn't look too bad. I mean, ultimately, it was a case of they were still coming on to us. We weren't really putting that much pressure on the ball, and there was a lot of time and space to shoot for a lot of chances, including most of the goals. It's just one of many things on the long list of what needs to improve immediately. Like you asked me a question about Bristol City. In my head, I almost sort of moved on from Bristol City really quickly because I think we all kind of saw the line and expected that to come. And as a result, I wasn't even really that hurt by it because I just kind of expected it, really. But B, in my head, I was more thinking about Oxford now is the main one. That's must win, not from a survival perspective. We can lose that and still stay up. It's a must win from a Rooney perspective and pressure on the board perspective. I think we all know what's going to happen if Oxford get in the lead and we are playing as we have been recently. Particularly in Oxford, I think it's 1 win in 10 for them at home park, where we've been strong but lucky for the last 3 games. That I suppose I will probably come on to that later. But I moved on from Bristol City very quickly just because I can't say I was too surprised. As soon as the first one went in, we all kind of knew where it was going, didn't we?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty sad indictment. James, before we get on to the second half and what was, even by our standards, a pretty abysmal 10-minute period in the game, we did make 6 changes, which I think, whilst Rooney admitted after the game on Tuesday night if he could change all 11, he would. He wasn't able to because of the length of the injury list. Were you still surprised to see 6, and in particular, the 6?
I think when we talk about the changes, it's going to colour a lot of. I want to keep my Tinder drive for points of view to other questions later, because it's going to be this theme that comes through. But another change in formation, another shape that just got dreamed up, ready for this game in a few days to respond to what happened last time. A lineup that seemingly was a punishment lineup, perhaps, just to put the boot into a few players deemed to not have done the business or to have capitulated at Norwich. So you've got an injury, a pretty beefy injury crisis. Ben shot me down from calling it biblical. It might be just one of the testaments, but you know, it's a chunky injury crisis, and so to leave, I would say 3 of our first starting 11 current. Well, not even currently. If we were all fit, I'd still have Al-Haj, Gray, and JB in the side. To leave those 3 out, we've got a week's rest, so it's not like we're resting them for the next home game. So it seemed just to yet again be picking a formation on a whim, picking a lineup on a whim, and then to chop and change system and personnel seemingly every game now, where we're just coming off the back of a back 3 experiment. We've obviously had the 7 at the back at Leeds. It seems to be a different system every week now, and this is something I remember coming through from, or hearing by osmosis on the Birmingham tenure, that when things started to go wrong, it just became a pick your own system situation where you're just trying to make anything or find something work in real time. And so I want to leave Tinder drive later to sort of analyze that in more detail. But we played. Look, I mean, I saw it reported as a 4-1-4-1, looked like a 4-5-1 to me. That's because we were playing so deep. We were just sort of two banks across the back. We still managed to play 5 across the middle and leave our fullbacks completely exposed one-on-one, allowing first off long crossfield balls to be pinged into their advancing fullbacks, and then to leave our fullbacks fully exposed, which I don't see how. He does make quite a nice. I mean, I think this is right. I've not really had it backed up by anyone else, but he seemed to make a tactical switch halfway through the first half, where Mumba came over to the other side because Saka was having such a terrible time protecting Poulsen, and that actually, when it went into 0-0 at half time, I thought, well, that's one positive, because most of the bevy of chances that they had in the first half actually came within the first half of the first half. And when the switch was made, it seemed to shore things up. I thought, if we can just carry this through for the second half, then, you know, as you said, we could go on to nick something. We could get something out of the game. We could bring on more attacking players on. Perhaps this isn't the worst strategy. But really, unless you're attacking, you are defending. So we were just allowing them to play in the part of the pitch where we're at our worst, and that is in our own third. So yeah, to answer your question, I wasn't surprised to see another formation debuted in the game. I wasn't surprised to see punitive and punishment 11 put out, but I think if you're playing with one hand tied behind your back in terms of injuries, he chose to tie his other hand behind his back with a pretty woeful game plan, a woeful 11, and a woeful performance.
Yeah, I think.
I guess just quickly, like it's not even like optimism, but just, I guess, to play devil's advocate, I did think we were set up a bit better than on Tuesday. And one thing that I called for on the podcast after Tuesday's game was to just get more bodies in midfield and have more control in there, because, like, I think that was a big part of us conceding so many early goals away from home, is just losing that midfield battle straight out the gate. And actually, I felt we did have more control in midfield. Again, this is all relative. You know, I don't think we had a great deal of control necessarily, but I think we had more. And I think that probably did contribute to stopping them scoring until about an hour in. And actually, one player I thought had a relatively positive game, with relatively again being the sort of key word, was Forshaw. I think he actually at least kind of kept his head up even when we went several goals down. I felt like he was at least kind of trying to switch the ball forward a little bit, and sort of I guess that's kind of what you want your more senior players to do, right? When the whole team around them is losing their head. Obviously, it wasn't enough in isolation. Still not saying that Forshaw had an unbelievable game or anything like that. I mean, everyone was poor to a greater or lesser extent. He was just on the lesser extent side of things. But yeah, I do think just to sort of mention it and to play devil's advocate maybe a little, I felt it was a slightly better system than the previous one. Although I do completely take James's point that it seems to be just throwing random systems at the wall and seeing what works. I guess I just think this one did actually work a little bit better. And the fact that we collapsed was, I think, also a lot to do with just confidence and individual mistakes in the way that the second and third goals have gone in particular, maybe more so than anything that was like terribly systemic. Whereas on Tuesday, I thought it really looked like the system was sort of to blame for, again, the players were obviously very, very poor individually, but I thought the system felt more integral to our defeat in the week, I would say. But that would be just my sort of caveat on what James said. I generally agree, but I did think this system was slightly better.
No, I agree. The three in the middle was definitely beneficial in a defensive perspective. Like the number of times that Norwich were outnumbering us about 4, 5, 6 to 2 or 1 in midfield, just they get their wingers invert so much. There were so many times when there were like 3, 4, 5 extra bodies in the center of the pitch against Rams on JV. That was nuts. I suppose my problem was that there was just that was fine as a sort of defensive measure, but there was no real plan going forward. They were way too deep. The huge chasms of space between defense, midfield, and attack just meant that, I'm not sure if any of you seen Oxford's equalising goal, but there's a lot that Harco could learn just from watching that goal in terms of the bodies they got forward, the short distances between them. We're nowhere near. I think confidence has completely gone as part of what's happened there. And I think Rooney, specifically in his comments around simplifying the game, has decided to go just ultra orthodox sort of stuff we saw from Derek Adams, which was not to slight Adams, because obviously for him it worked a lot better because we didn't have one of the worst teams in the league out on the pitch. But ultimately, the plan was we'll try and keep our shape and be compact, and then hope something happens on going forward. But I just want to add to James' comment, particularly around what was Paulson doing. He was so narrow for every switch. Every time that switch came across, it was like he's playing right centre back in a back three, not right. I feel a little bit bad for Paulson on a personal level, but I feel incredibly annoyed with Rooney. We saw him play right back, and it was absolutely shit against Sheffield Wednesday. He wasn't even one of the worst players on the pitch on that day as well. It was probably the worst thing about that game. But I just thought it was, how could you put him back there? It sounded like punishment for Sorinola. Maybe Sorinola was tired, but I suppose you don't have, if Sook's not available. I don't know, but just Paulson was absolutely dire. It was so bad, and each time, I understand, he doesn't want someone to run inside him if he comes out to commit to the fullback who's overlapping, but just push a little bit further out. Asaka, remember, having to come all the way back into right back, leaving us with that sort of back five and no winger, and that's the sort of eventuality that left us trapped perennially in defence because our wingers would come back to cover the fullbacks. It's the fullback's job, and you've got the midfielders there then to pick up the space that your winger who's going inside is picking up. There's so many there were so many huge things that were just going wrong on that day, and that was just one of the ones. Isaka's job isn't to exclusively track the overlapping fullback. The team can adapt for that. Paulson goes out, Randall or someone just goes in to cover a bit of that space. You don't need to pull the winger all the way back and have them always there.
So let's get on to the 10-minute moment of madness, if you like, that John referenced in the post-match run through, even because I've got a stat. I have many things written down for tonight, and one of the stats is we are the joint worst in the Sky Bet Championship when conceding first. Now, this includes home and away, so this isn't just kept to away games. This is including home games. 13 times we have conceded the first goal, which again is the joint worst in the league. We have won 1 game from going behind. We have drawn 4. We have lost 8, and we have 7 points when conceding the first goal. Now, one thing we do know when we concede the first goal, particularly on the road, is then our soft underbelly becomes incredibly apparent. I mean, you guys have a little bit more cumulative experience of following Argyle than I do. Have any of you guys ever seen a weaker team when going behind, in particular on the road? Because this is becoming alarming, isn't it? There's just no structure. John mentions it himself that you concede a goal, you're then to sit. You just make it difficult, make it tough for the opposition. Don't go bang bang bang. It was one of the problems Tuesday night was we conceded a goal. Within 3 minutes, we could have been 3-0 down. There was no response again yesterday, lads, was there? That's an open question, whoever wants it.
I actually was thinking about this. I could actually struggle to think of any team, not just Argyle teams. I don't think I've seen any team in over the last 9 games that looks as out of their own depth in their own division as we have over in our away games and perhaps even our home games in the last 9 games. Even Rotherham last year came and gave us a game. Like we look atrocious at times, and the way and obviously recency bias takes us for the last 2 games probably the worst 180 minutes I could think of in any time I've been following Argyle. But I can't even think.
That's not even recency bias though. I think that's how many times we considered 10 goals over 2 games, and I'd honestly thought that really it could have been a lot worse. You know, it doesn't feel like those 10 were. It doesn't feel like it's like Wednesday again. They scored 4. It's like, okay, that's generous on us. Yeah, sorry. It's not
even a National League team would go to Bristol City away and could put up a better showing of themselves than that. Yeah. If you were following from the Conference South and you went up to Bristol City for a cup game and you had your pants pulled down like that, you would come away fuming. And we're supposed to be in the same league. It's a complete joke.
Look at Maidstone going to Ipswich last year, Portman Road, and did they win? I think they won, didn't they? They definitely knocked them out, but like the bar we're talking about here is really low. It's like when you boil football down to its basics, it's having a plan to keep the ball out at one end and having a plan to get it into the other. And I could not tell you remotely. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, it was Maidstone. They won at Portman Road in the FA Cup with a pretty strong Ipswich side as well. Like no shots at Leeds. It's like I just want to understand what was the plan for scoring yesterday. Like, honestly, what was the plan? It didn't feel like there was remotely any kind of idea other than hope that someone just went on and
Hardy got in behind. That seems to be it in the first half. Just launch it long to Hardy. Hope he somehow won a 50-50 against their central defenders, or Nick one running in behind. I didn't see any broader plan than that across the game. Let's not forget though that Hardy did have that shot at the start of the second half. He hit straight down the keeper's throat. But other than that, there wasn't anything evident, was there? That's the problem here. Is there was no clear, evident plan on how we were going to impose ourselves on Bristol City.
The big issue I have is Rooney coming out after the game. It's easy to sympathise with a lot of what he's saying, but he's saying there's no belief in the team when we go under, we fold. But when he puts us out as a team to essentially try and survive until the 70th or 80 minutes and hope that we bring Gray on and get a lucky break, or Obafemi does something akin to Portsmouth where he just creates something out of nothing. That is so. How can you go away and complain that there's a lack of belief in the team when the team is being set up week in, week out to just try and it seems to try to survive. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I think to Joe's question as well, it sort of feels like a trap, right? It's like we're really, really bad when we go behind. But in order to avoid that situation, you have to score the first goal, and we don't look like we're set up to score the first goal. So as James is saying, we look like we're set up to survive. Well, the logical conclusion of that is you basically have to draw 0-0, right? Or just like score a goal completely out of nowhere, which, to be fair, we do have the attacking quality to do. We have shown that this season. Obviously, it doesn't really help that a lot of those moments players are injured or very inconsistent, but that's not really a sustainable plan for scoring, particularly away from home. So yeah, you sort of end up hoping the end goal is basically just to nick a goalless draw. Do we look like a team that's capable of doing that? No. And like if Bristol City hadn't had that stroke of luck when Twine with the ball hitting twine when it did. They would have scored 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later. They would have scored at some point because they just would have kept on coming. Yeah, exactly. The goal was coming. So you end up in a situation where, you inevitably basically go behind, more or less inevitably, and collapse. But there's no plan to really avoid that situation because we don't set up in a way that makes us look capable of scoring goals. But then if we did set up in a more attacking system, we'd probably concede sooner because we'd be wide open. It just feels like a kind of circling the drain effect, right, a little bit. And yesterday I think was concerning, particularly, I guess, in the sense that we didn't concede early, which had been a problem in lots and lots of other games this season. And maybe we were all saying to ourselves, well, if we don't concede in the first 10 minutes, we'll give ourselves a better chance if we can get into halftime at 0-0. Well, we did those things. We still lost 4-0. So it doesn't really feel like there's a way out of this. That it's just not very simply to play a lot better. And frankly, also to have better players as well. I don't want to single pulse it out necessarily because they all deserve criticism to some extent, at least. Apart from, as I mentioned, maybe Grimshaw and maybe Forshaw. But like, if you're going to play a back four and he is one of the people in it, you are just setting yourselves up for him to be exposed as a weak link. I mean, you just are. Like, this is just the evidence that everyone can see with their own eyes based on every time he has played. He is visibly not good enough. Now, whether that's a true reflection on his ability or whether he's just in an absolutely stinking period of form, I don't know. And I don't want to write the guy off as kind of irredeemably dreadful. But right now, he is for whatever reason, just awful. So basically, you're sort of inviting teams to come onto you, which invites conceding a goal. And then, as we've discussed, we don't look like coming back from that. I mean, it all just feels like a terrible downward spiral. At home, at least, and maybe I wouldn't entirely necessarily agree with Nick's characterization of the last few games being as lucky as he thinks, although certainly there has been some luck involved. But I think it's undeniable that at home, at the very least, when we go behind, there's a bit of fighting spirit, right? There's a bit of a never say die attitude, and that has manifested in scoring all of those late goals. Away from home, that just doesn't exist. That's like the only thing which we sort of have, I guess, that can drag us back into these games is something that for some reason we just cannot reproduce away from home. And yeah, I think it's really concerning.
I'll ask Nick and James this very quickly, because John knows I've asked this repeatedly over the last couple of weeks. Do you guys now just think it is purely psychological, this away run, or is it just down to the bare facts that we aren't good enough, we haven't got a good enough squad, or is there more to it? Because we know that historically Argyle are poor on the road. Wayne Rooney is now 8 from about 66? 8 wins from 66, 67 games as a championship manager. Is it deeper lying, or is it purely a mental thing that's going on here with this group of players in particular? Because it can't just be this group, can it? It's got to be a huge wide ranging factor.
I never want it. I don't want this to be taken as a comparison in any way, but if you want to have a look at the fragile state of or the fragile nature of elite sport, and look at Man City, easily the best team in Europe and can't buy a win 7 games. And they've only had a couple of injuries, and it seems to have completely derailed everything they've got going on. Now, I'm just going to end the comparison there. But if you actually extrapolate that out to a team that's extremely poor in its within the league that finds itself in, I think heads across the squad are scrambled in the backroom staff and the playing staff, and I think that started at Cardiff, where I think we thought we were going to turn them over quite easily, and we got an absolute barrage of a team that was sent out to really to expose us, to fight. Obviously, Sissoko lost his head in that game. I think that just sort of just goes to show that there's a huge psychological impact in that thrashing, and obviously that was the last time he's played for the club since then. And the loss of him as an outlet, I think, has started a spiral of lack of belief. It's nullified the extremely weak data or weak attacking output from a data perspective we have even had in the first place. So I think it's a huge part of it is psychological. The way we're setting up, the way we're picking teams, I think is emotional and psychological from emotional from Rooney, and I think speaks to sort of scrambled thinking where we actually, I'm sure we'll go back onto this later. I know me and Nick are extremely aligned on this. Goes back to like we actually had it. We actually had our best system at one point, and we've scrapped it for a number of different approaches and tactical approaches that, for whatever reason, never really fixed where we actually had something good going on. So I think heads are scrambled across the team and the squad and the playing staff, and this is what you get.
Nick, anything you want to weigh in quickly?
Quick, how long have I got? I got about four thoughts. First one would be the away wins down across the board. If you saw my eyes shooting up and down just then, I was quickly totaling up. Last season, 32% of away games were won by away sides. This season, it's down to 24%. Across the league, there are a few trends notable this season compared to previous ones. One of them is that away sides are just not winning as much. Don't know why, no one's really got a theory on that, but away sides currently, that actually be the way the games are falling, that right now the big sides just aren't winning away, and then by the end of the season it'll sort itself out. But right now, away sides are winning less than usual. Obviously, that's hitting us even more, because if you imagine where our away performances were last year and then transpose them onto a year when home sides are stronger, that hits you. I thought about this a while ago when we had our 3 home wins, but the 2 1-0 away losses, and then after the Cardiff game and getting the long away run. There is definitely a mental thing. There are teams that see their games, particularly from like constructing a season, it's like you win your home ones and you draw your away ones, and that averages you 2 points per game, and that gets you promotion and so forth. There is a broad, or at least a lot of sports psychologists see that link there, whereby teams are far more territorial about their home ground. They must win at home kind of thing, versus we are happy to settle for a draw away kind of thing. So that's part of the reason why. But with Argyle, I don't know. I break our season up in sort of 4 phases. Phase 1, where the first 4 games which didn't play good football. Phase 2 was it was like Sunderland through to Preston, I'd say maybe, whereby we found what we wanted to do. It worked broadly for the first 5 games. Then 3 games after that, teams just worked out. You just congest the centre of the pitch. We will run it in the centre of the pitch. We will not go wide. I mean, honestly, the screenshots I got from the Preston game, where you've got Barney Mumber on the left wing, like arms out waiting, and we are still trying to run it through a scoreline of like 9 Preston and 7 Argyle players. And then from then on, we've kind of just shied away from. We've decided that rather than fix the passing out from the back approach, we just get rid of the passing out from the back approach, and I don't know. I think with Gray and Obafemi, maybe we could build a setup similar to Luton's that got them promoted, which was a very long ball to big strikers and build from their approach. But if we can do it, we certainly haven't found a way to do it. And the last few games have just been, particularly especially away, we have just been so focused on not conceding many that we've just almost sacrificed any kind of attacking approach. We've created absolutely nothing. Yeah, that's my broad thoughts on the away approach.
I think we need to very quickly move on from the away form. Otherwise, we'll end up giving ourselves a complex, and we might need the psychologists more than the players. John, I want to come to you because I think this is something we're aligned on. We'll come on to the 2 lads in a minute, and this is about it's a very similar situation we found ourselves in the middle of March, when things were starting to go a little bit stale and a little bit tetchy in the stands, and that is the perceived silence after what's been a horrid week, as bad a week as you could possibly imagine. 10 goals in 2 games in front of, well over 3,500 supporters. Time and time again, we hear that the supporters have to come for the players. Well, they haven't come for us the last 4 or 5 days with their performances. It's been dreadful. And James referenced the data, the very poor data that we're putting up in recent games. And I want to take you all back to interview that Simon Hallett gave to TalkSport back in May with Simon Jordan and Jim White. And on the in that interview, he mentioned that it wasn't all about results. And one of the things that Simon Jordan says was the orthodox your thinking is you have to take results into consideration, to which that was put back to Simon Hallett. And it was asked, do not take results into consideration when appointing a manager, obviously on Rooney's track record. And Simon Hallett's response was interesting. It said, depends on how many results you're looking at. We look at underlying performances on the grounds that any individual outcome is a combination of the underlying performance and randomness or variation, or maybe even luck. So looking at small data sets and just analysing the outcomes is insufficient. At least that's what we believe. So that's fine. So let's look at some of those small data sets and underlying performances. We have the worst defence in the division. We've conceded 34. Only Luton are the only other team who've conceded more than 30. We have the worst away record in the league, albeit Oxford have the similar same points, but they've played 2 less games. We've conceded 27 goals away. This season we've lost 6-1, 5-0, 4-0 twice, 2-0 in a cup, a 3-0 in the league, and 3 1-0 defeats this year. One of them was at home. We're conceding 2.1 goals per game. We're 24th in the division for XG. We're comfortably the worst in the division for XG by a whole 5.0, even though XG is a load of poppycock, as we all know. We're 24th in the division for corners. We're 23rd in the division for accurate crosses. We're 22nd in the division for touches in the opposing box. We're 17th in the division for interceptions per match. We're 21st in the division for possession won in the final third. And our goalkeepers have made the most saves in the division with 77. So the underlying data suggests that we're one of, if not the worst team in the league. What we're seeing on the pitch is backing that up at the moment because the performances are dreadful, in particular away from home. Now, we know we're unbeaten in 6 at home and we have to cling on to that. We'll come on to that a little bit later on. But right now, Simon Hallett's quote from the TalkSport interview is not backing up. Well, it's not necessarily lending to anything positive at the moment, is it, John? And therefore, the club need to come out and back their man, don't they? They appointed him. They need to come out now, rally behind him, and say this is why we've got Wayne Rooney as the head coach.
First of all, I'd like to issue a clarification to Paul Stiles. Paulson would actually get you 59 points in Scrabble if you were to lay down all the letters yourself. So that's at least something. In response to your more of a comment than a question, I think we've discussed the underlying data side of things, and I think these two other guests we have on today are going to have a more detailed perspective on that than me. I would just say that I think that those underlying numbers are worth maybe a little bit more than you think with respect to XG, but I might think they're worth a bit less than some others think. As I've said previously, I do get the sense that like a lot of the really, really bad data outcomes have been concentrated into games where we have just been absolutely terrible, of which there have been far too many, to be clear, and that's not to say it's acceptable. I do think that there are games in which we have played well, or at least sort of like fine enough to justify getting something out of the game on kind of a lucky break or whatever. So I don't necessarily think that like that data is so bad across the board, ergo we deserve to be bottom with like 5 points, because that's not how football works. It works on a game by game basis. And I would suggest to James's earlier point actually about Rotherham, Rotherham lost a lot of games last season, but I can't really remember them getting tanked with the regularity that we're getting tanked. Equally, they didn't manage to find the results at home with the consistency that we've managed to do it so far. So it's a bit of a weird situation that I can't really think of an analog for it, where a team is just like so bad sometimes. But as you mentioned, is then still unbeaten in 6 home games. Obviously a bit of luck in that as we've discussed. But the gap between our best this season and our worst this season has been extraordinarily wide, and obviously we are seeing more of the worst than the best, certainly at the moment. But yeah, I guess all to say that I think that data stuff, is a bit more nuanced than just sort of quoting things in the aggregate across the entire season, in my opinion. I don't think it's fair to say that should average out to, we should lose 2-1 or 3-1 every game. I think we've deserved the absolute chonkings that we've taken, and we've deserved some of the wins that we've had. But to come on to your other question, I guess, about the sort of communication, I think there's a lot
Because
of stick.
This very quickly, this just to put meat on those bones. This is what the problem was towards the end of Foster's tenure, wasn't there? There was radio silence from the football club. It looked from the outside looking in that he wasn't being backed when times got tough. Now we all know that when things went well over the last
was the problem not that
years,
the football was terrible and we were careening towards relegation? Like the comms played a part, but ultimately on the pitch was a reason so that everything was such a problem with Foster.
Publicly, he wasn't getting any support, Nick, was he? That was the point. And if you look at when you look at Schumacher, the times were going well. We were getting chairman's chats, we were getting Neil Dewsnip interviews and things like that. Those stopped when things got tough under Foster. The silence came in. Foster lost his job. Football was bad. Football is not good now, and the comms have stopped from the football club. This is the problem we're getting to, John, isn't it?
I think that there's a couple of things here. The dreaded vote of confidence is a thing for a reason, right? If Hallett was to come out tomorrow and say we have full confidence in Wayne Rooney, the headline, would be, Hallett gives vote of confidence in Rooney, which every football fan knows is code for this manager is a few games away from the sack if they don't buck up their ideas, right? The fact of the statement being made itself is kind of the story in itself, whether that's what Hallett would necessarily mean by it or not. And I think the same would have been true with Foster. Also, in Foster's case, presumably they would have had to come out and make a statement in support of him after like the Preston game where we lost 1-0 and it went really toxic. Well, 2 games later, he was sacked. So they would have looked stupid because they would have essentially backed him and then sacked him. So I can kind of understand why they don't want to come out and limit their sort of public wiggle room for making a decision or do something that would be perceived as a kind of coded rebuke dressed up in positive management speak. I do completely understand why they don't want to make that kind of a statement. And I'm not personally looking for them to come out and say, Wayne Rooney is great and the fans need to shut up and back him or whatever. That's not the kind of communication I'm looking for from them. I would also just preface what I'm about to say by saying that I think there's a lot of stick of Hallett and Dewsnip going around. I really want to stress that I completely understand fans being frustrated at the moment. This whole year has been pretty grim, honestly. From January right through to now, obviously with the massive high of that little flurry of form at the end of last season that saved our skin. But this has been a year of really slim pickings for Argyle fans. And I do really, sympathise with people, ourselves included, I guess, who've spent a lot of money following the team and just watched terrible, terrible football for far too much of this year under a succession of different managers. That being said, I think if you zoom out and you sort of look at the bigger picture, we are where Hallett and Dewsnip promised they would get us, which is outside of the relegation zone in the Championship ahead of time, having been here for a year already. So I do want to I guess not join in with the chorus of people who are saying that they're the problem and we need to get rid of them. We can have a longer conversation about this some other time or maybe later in the podcast or whatever. But, I think there are very legitimate concerns about the extent of the financial backing that Hallett is capable of providing with that investment. I think there are big questions about some of the appointment and recruitment practices that have happened under Dewsnip. But ultimately, the big picture is not one of a failing football club. It's one of a football club that arguably, if anything, has potentially sort of succeeded too hard and out-succeeded its means and has stopped making the decisions in a sort of short-term sense that enable that kind of treading water and defying gravity to continue to happen. That being said, I think there are obviously fans feel like they are not being communicated with to the extent they were in the good times. And it is the job, I think, of the people who run the club to take that on board. And Hallett, and this is entirely his fault, has made truly unfortunate comments in recent months about, fan pressure being something we sort of double down against because, it's uninformed and it's kind of a bullying minority. That was in the case of Foster. Well, in the end, that bullying minority, quote unquote, were completely correct because the outcome they were calling for before it happened was the outcome that kept us up when we would otherwise, I think, certainly have gone down. Likewise now, I'm personally not Rooney out yet. I don't think Hallett will be Rooney out for a little while, to be completely honest, unless things continue to be really, really apocalyptically dreadful. But I think, and again, I'm not looking for him to come out and say, I back the manager or whatever, and the fans can shut up. But I think there needs to be some communication, right? I think there needs to be a recognition that this is a tough moment. It's been a tough year. Fans have just spent a load of money going to 2 places that are ultimately, even though Bristol is closer to Plymouth than most away games, fairly far away, to watch 2 of the worst performances that I can remember in Argyle history back to back, right? I think just some sort of recognition, some sort of statement of we appreciate your support. We know this is a tough time. We get it. But, trust the process. And we are working every day, to make this better. And, the club is pulling in one direction rather than silence that is sort of filled with memories of those contemptuous remarks he made about sections of the fan base and sort of arrogant sounding comments. I think, that I know what I'm doing and I run a business and I'm a gambler who runs businesses and, all these fans, that's kind of the undertone of some of it, right? It felt superior, some of those comments towards the back end of last season. I think just a statement of recognition of what people are feeling right now would go a long way. I don't think it has to be a particularly substantive statement, with regard to Rooney one way or another or whatever. But I do think some communication out of the club rather than just this silence would be so welcome. My understanding is that Hallett is in the UK, right? That he is going to go and speak to a fan group in Cornwall, I believe, at some point, if that hasn't happened already.
Was that the game yesterday?
I think he was,
right?
It was
in the away end yesterday.
I didn't see him.
It was in the away end yesterday, apparently.
So yeah, but I think overall, in my opinion, he still should be massively in credit for what he has done for the club. And I think it is a shame that is being drowned out by more short-term negative trends. And I don't think those are entirely his fault, but I think the messaging around it has not been great in the last few months, and he has the opportunity to come out and fix that with one well-pitched statement. And I hope he takes that opportunity in the coming days and weeks.
James, does this not ring true of a number of potential little bumps in the road that we've had since promotion to the Championship? I mean, I wrote a few down, and this isn't purely just on what's happened in the boardroom. It's just as a general Argyle thing. Since we won League One, nearly 2 years ago now, we went into last summer, first season in the Championship, knowing that we only had two strikers on the books in Hardy and Wayne, and it went all the way to deadline day to get Bundu, who we know isn't a striker. Even last season, we had little things such as the Leeds away game in the league not following the reciprocal pricing structure. They put out the ticket details of £45, massive issue on social media. 2 hours later, oh no, actually it's going to be £30. You've got then things such as allowing Stephen Schumacher to just board that helicopter without seemingly an ounce of putting up a fight. You've got the appointment of Foster after over 100 excellent applicants that came in the door. You've got the recruitment in January. You've got, then appointing Wayne Rooney in the summer, despite clearly it needing a steady pair of hands on the rudder. And then most recently, obviously, Finn, formerly of the podcast Parish, led the charge about the personal assistance on supporters, coaches not getting their subsidy to travel. It just seems like the stars haven't aligned as they used to a couple of years ago, and a few decisions just aren't being made as they once were. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think there's when times are bad, there's a temptation to make everything about everything, and what you just listed out there are a ton of negative things that come from different parts of the club, different parts of the structure, that perhaps not. You don't immediately look to the board and say these are board driven decisions, and some of them are proper stinkers as well, like the sort of the disabled chaperone policy is just it's ridiculous. I don't know how that hasn't got overturned yet at board levels, so perhaps everything is about everything. But we could go for all those decisions and say and point to the root cause. Does that point to some kind of like overall death of the well-run club? No, not. I don't think does in entirety. If there's one thing I'd point to, there just seems to be over the last couple of years since the title win, a kind of trend to make the outlying decision to be different for the sake of being different, to drink our own Kool-Aid relentlessly, where we can pluck a untested assistant and throw them into management because we've got such a great structure. and we can give them no backroom staff or any and free run to do whatever they want and expect that to go well. Or we can take a manager who has a horrendous track record because of the vibes, because of a sort of one Argyle philosophy, and it'll be fine because of our fantastic governance structure. And actually, I know from the top that there's a sense that the manager isn't the cult of the manager is over, or they feel that the cult of the manager is overblown, so that the team will perform to a sum of its parts of recruitment and structure and training facilities and culture and ethos, and all these things will drive into a positive direction, and the role of that manager is less than perhaps we or outsiders perceive as a influencer on team performance. And I think as we go on, that's becoming not the case. Clearly, that man management, tactics, structure, belief in the team, psychology are all driven from that figurehead. And I think that's probably where we're seeing parts of these changes and these phenomenon we've seen since the structure. That is a kind of a belief in our ability to produce magic that is being proved wrong in moments.
To be fair, they're not wrong that or at least in my opinion, they're not wrong that the cult of the manager is overstated a bit. Like, you can see a lot of other clubs that have got it right when done right with the director of football. Like, there are so many upsides to it when done right. It does make it easier to transition between managers. It makes, because if you find a great manager and you build your team around the manager and that manager goes, it can be very, very difficult to replace them tactically in terms of players and so forth. The idea behind the director of football structure and other areas like you say, investing in infrastructure so we have better gym facilities, investing in a coaching setup so that we've got the best coaches and so forth. The idea behind that is to be able to make that transition more seamless. But it does feel a bit like, and let's be fair, we are gambling here because we can make a much easier comment on what happens on the pitch because we can see a lot. We're analysing what we see on the pitch, but we don't actually know what's going on in the background. So we're ultimately, this is much, much more guesswork essentially. But it does feel that Argyle have gone too far one way and decided that, yes, structure is great, and that means that structure means we don't need to necessarily, we can be more risky with our manager because we've got, X, Y, Z other processes in. So I'm absolutely resolutely defending. Well, actually, no, I don't even feel like I need to defend Halleck. I think there's only a small minority, and in particular, they're really inflamed by the awful results, as they absolutely have the right to, because the fact that I didn't care that we lost 4-0 to Bristol City because I thought we'd lose by that many to Bristol City speaks volumes about the state of where we are right now. So I don't blame people right now for being angry about certain people in particular, and that anger being focused on Halleck. I think he's a superb chairman when you look at what the job of the chairman is. And I think the main things you can question for right now were the hiring of Rooney and the hiring of Foster, because right now they're both, Foster is absolutely a dud. Rooney is very much, it's going down that way. And then where I disagree with you, John, is I think there's a lot more that you can ask of, is Neil Dusnip doing his job? But this isn't obviously a podcast to talk about that, but I mean, I've got my doubts personally. And ultimately, if you're building a structure that puts a lot of power in the director of football, and that is your stabilizing factor around losing managers and so forth, then say you have got a director of football who isn't quite up to the task. Like, I would kind of say, look at Stoke and their first director of football, absolute failure. I will not be surprised if John Walters proves to be a failure in that role. I think his decision, regardless of our feelings about Schumacher, from a footballing perspective, his decision to go to Schumacher I thought was pretty stupid. He might get away with it with Plack, or maybe he knows a lot more than expected. The other point I'd make, just briefly on coaches, is broadly speaking, we got the same coaching staff as we had under Foster. I know that it only picked up in drips and drabs and bits and bobs, we can't see what goes on in the training ground, but under the previous regime of Lowe and Schumacher, I felt like you could constantly see growth in individual players throughout the season, right? You could always see that a player was improving, well, not always, but you saw it a lot. We haven't really seen much of that this year. And aside from Rooney and Shuttleworth, it's broadly the same coaching setup. There's potentially a question to be asked there, but we can't see the coaching. All the sort of, they look like qualified coaches based on their previous. They're not brand new people. They've all got quite long coaching careers, and there's a lot of good words that have been said about them. So maybe that's wide the mark, but worth bearing in mind.
I think that just go on the improvement in the squad. I think we did see improvement in the squad through that purple patch in October, where Sissoko and a few other players seem to be picking up direct influence from Rooney in terms of their positioning, in terms of their output.
Sissoko for sure.
Sissoko being the obvious one,
doing better
with his
and also Randall coming back this season looking better, albeit haven't done a bunch of work over the summer, so it could be attributed to that.
Well, the one thing we had with Shuey and Lowe is that they played settled systems, and then people were allowed to develop and grow within the system. And when we were playing a settled system, and this is just basically me doing my bit over and over again. When we had a settled system, we actually started to grow into that system, and we started to see improved performances. When people are being asked to being moved around from system to whether we're going direct, we're hitting it long, we're okay, we are passing out from the back now. Now we're not passing out from the back. Now we're playing 3. Now we're playing 4. Now we're playing 6. Now we're playing 4-5-1. I don't know. I think that just neuters any potential improvement we can see, and people are going in the other direction. Heads are so scrambled that I think even Mumba, being one of our performers of the season, and someone I did feel had improved dramatically in the first part of the season after a bit of a mixed start last season, where incidentally he was being played around the park quite a lot. Some of the decision making, he was of his decision making on Saturday was that ball he played across the 18-yard box just shows how scrambled it would be. Just to sort of finish on sort of the hierarchy and stuff. We know that Hallett's loves to be data driven, and he is a data driven person, and he won't have been blinded by the fact we were picking up lucky results. He'll be looking at the underlying data. I think one of the most worrying things that, from my perspective, when I started to sort of sketch down how I felt about the current situation, is that we've got this huge injury crisis. We've got this so many players to come back. They're not coming back for a long time. Just say that we did get through. We did give Rooney the time. We did get those players back. We did return to a settled formation, a settled system that we performed, and we did start playing out from the back. All we're reverting to statistically is a pretty poor data set we had when we did have all our players. Like we did have all our players at Cardiff. We had them all at Sheffield Wednesday. We still turned in absolutely anemic performances home and away when we did have our first best 11, which I do think is capable of staying up. So the best we can hope for is reverting to a set of data that would over a 46 game season probably see us struggling / going down anyway. So I feel like that's the real point that won't be lost on Hallett, is that even if we can revert, where we're trying to get to is a pretty bad place anyway.
I know we don't want to extend this conversation too much longer. I'm sure other bits, but I'd say just a very last brief point is, if you look at the XG differential, so XG for you minus XG against you in that sort of 5-game period where we liked, that we want to get back to, Argyle were about 17th. So though on paper it doesn't look great, in reality that kind of performance sustained over a season gets you, unless you're unlucky, that gets you safety relatively comfortably, 5 to 10 points kind of thing. So disagree. I think that getting back to that is enough to get us up. I think there's a misinterpretation of how some people determine quality performance based on XG, but that's all. I think that level of performance over a season definitely keeps us up.
Right. That's it. as a if I was a producer or a director now of a TV program, I'd slap in a 30-second commercial now, and that's it. Negativity is done. We're parking Bristol City.
You haven't got
time
an
to look forward.
advert for a haven't got an advertorial for a virtual private network provider that I won't name for competition reasons ready up your sleeve. No.
That's it. November's done. November was a pretty tough month, I think we'd all agree. Although we got 5 points out of it, it was still a very tough month. Today's December the 1st. We got a new month, a fresh batch of fixtures ahead of us, and that all gets underway on Saturday at Home Park against Oxford United. Let's get that preview in the bag straight away. John, I'll let you finish off your Christmas biscuit, you called it, before we started. Oxford come to town, as mentioned earlier on when I was reading through the charge sheet of the pretty horrendous stats that are in our camp at the moment, that Oxford are joint worst in the division on the road, albeit they don't concede anywhere near as many as we do. They got a pretty good point at home yesterday to Mill, as it's commonly known.
You froze there for a second, I think.
No, I definitely didn't. That's all I could hear on the TV that I was watching anyway. What can we expect from Oxford? But I think a more pressing point is, what can we expect from Argyle?
Well, it's a must-win game, I think, and to Nick's point, it's not a must-win for the purposes of staying up. We could definitely have 2 more absolutely shocking defeats in the next 2 and stay up very comfortably. This league can change very quickly, but I think for the Rooney experiment, it feels absolutely make or break, doesn't it? And yeah, I've gone from, I don't know, I might road this back. Yeah, certainly yesterday coming out of the ground, having not really been anywhere near Rooney out before, I was saying, these 2 games are for me it, and then I'll be.
I thought we'd been the negativity. Where's the positivity?
He asked me to. He did ask me to talk about an Argyle performance, albeit in prediction form rather than review form. So I've got to be honest.
In all fairness, very quickly, John, I'll jump in. I have got like 16 things starred, Nick, that we're going to have to come back to, and I can actually back myself that they're all going to be positive. So there may still be a bit of negativity to come in question time.
So to do the positivity, which I was actually about to get onto, after saying I think this is make or break for him between this and the Swansea game, it's probably the kindest fixture on paper that you could have coming out of these 2 that we've just lost so heavily, and I'm sure that some Oxford fan with 15,000 Twitter followers is busy clipping up that sentence in isolation so that they can parade it around the internet when they do us 1-0. It's not to say it'll be an easy game. Obviously, the old cliches about there being no easy games at this level apply. I think they had a pretty impressive start to the season. And I think just on the whole, even though they've massively trailed off in terms of form, which I expected to happen, I think you've got to give them credit, right? I think they probably should be in the bottom 3 on resources. I, for one, felt they would probably come up and be enormously out of their depth. I was actually kind of quietly pleased when they came up instead of Bolton in the playoffs last year, because I felt that Bolton would have the resources and the sort of infrastructure in place to have a much better crack at finishing mid-table in the Championship. Now, I do personally believe that Oxford will go down at this juncture. I think that they are sliding in a way that is going to be hard to recover, but that doesn't mean that they're a dreadful football team. Their recruitment with, I don't really, don't have insight into their books, but I think it was a bit of a shock to the system to some of us when we expected we would not have the worst recruitment in the league over the summer. And actually they came out and signed, I think, quite a lot of very respectable Championship or at least sort of Championship League One yo-yo type players. They've got a young manager who I personally think is a bit overrated, but obviously you can't really argue with the achievement of taking them up. And as someone who's had a pretty good start to the season with them, I think they're clearly playing for him.
Is he as overrated as Danny Roll?
Well, actually, contrary to misleadingly clipped Twitter videos, I actually don't think that Danny Roll is overrated. Quite the opposite.
Are you aiming for more clips? Are you baiting the Oxford fans here?
Not intentionally, no. But look, I think it's all to say it'll be a difficult game. They'll see it as one that is more winnable than a lot of their other fixtures, so I'm sure they'll come down fired up. I don't anticipate it's going to be an easy ride or a walkover for us, but given our home form, I think it should also probably be looked at as a sort of game where we can absolutely pick up 3 points, even with this injury list and even coming off the back of those two awful performances. Like, I don't think we'll have to be, we'll have to be a lot better than the last two away games for sure, but I don't think we'll have to be much better than our recent level of home performance, even though that has not been amazing, to have a really good shot of getting something out of this game. I think it could be a pretty poor game overall between two sides struggling for confidence a bit. I expect them to make it difficult for us. I expect them to, be coached in such a way that we'll try and allow them to keep it tight at the back and sort of pick off our vulnerabilities, of which there are many, going the other way. But I think we should hopefully try and go into it with a sort of confidence that is born of not having, of only having lost at home once this season, right? We've got to try, if to James's point from earlier, there is a psychological dimension to all this, and I think there is to some extent. We've got to try and get ourselves into a mindset where, this is our turf. To Nick's earlier point, this is our territory. It's really, really important for us to win this game, and to sort of play in that mindset, rather than we're a team that's just been spanked 10-1 on aggregate across two away games. So far, there has been enough of a differential between that approach, home and away, that it gives me hope that we can sort of find a different mental space, and maybe we can sort of put in a better performance and use it as a sort of catalyst to be better in the coming weeks, both at home and away. But I think as Nick was saying, it's feeling like it's getting to shit or bust time for the Rooney experiment. So it's going to be a really important game for him, as well as being a really important game for us. And I think it's one where, compared to many other fixtures that could have come out of the hat at this particular juncture, it's a relatively, with the emphasis on that again, relatively kind one.
And James, we mustn't lose sight, as mentioned earlier, we are 6 unbeaten at home, and that's really got to be one of the final messages when the team leave the dressing room at 5-3 on Saturday, isn't it? You are a good team here. Just do what you do best here.
Yeah, it's a great chance to psychologically draw a line under the last two games. It's a great chance to start a run again. Remember that before the horror show at Norwich, we were 3 unbeaten. So we can reset the unbeaten clock. It's a great chance for Rooney to clear his head tactically and perhaps go back to something that is tried, tested, and has worked, and stop the experimentation. Get back to a settled system. Who we can field would be interesting, because I've seen everything from Whittaker will be back because he was only out for 2 weeks, to Whittaker's walking around with one leg at Bristol City. So I don't know.
The other question is, and I literally haven't seen it anywhere. I looked through all of Chris Errington's monologue. Where's Cornell Such?
Yeah.
Injured.
I had a big worry that there's been a falling out just because there hasn't been a mention about any injury. I think that's unlikely right now. Sorry?
I thought there had been a mention that someone had mentioned that he was injured at some point. I think so. But maybe this was inference that someone posted online, and it was actually not from an official.
So I inferred it because it seems by far and away the most likely. Let's not start spreading rumors. I inferred it, but the fact that we didn't have any kind of confirmation after that I'm aware of made me concerned that it wouldn't be unheard of after that kind of a Norwich debacle off the back of, well, it's now 1 win in 9, but then it was 1 win in 8, that there would be some words said and some kind of punishment meted out. I mean, also it did feel like Rooney kind of going for a bit of vengeance in some of the team selections. So, while I think unlikely, I wouldn't rule out. But hopefully we hear that it was a knock and he's back for Oxford.
Well, if that's what consigned us to... I was going to say, if that's what consigned us to Victor Paulson, I hope that whatever he said was worth dropping him over. Let's just put it that way. But my sense is that he's injured. I think I did see this from some crazy reliable source.
I mean, we haven't really touched on it, but Rooney was too busy dropping incendiary bombshells and throwing people under the bus in his post-match comments to actually go through any of the useful information about the side that was put out. So yeah, we seem to have no idea what the state of the first team is. Perhaps that's works in our favour in terms of Oxford not knowing how to prepare. But it's a huge chance.
This this wouldn't be unprecedented, right? Because I think that when Hardy initially just didn't appear in a squad, I don't think there was any indication that he was injured, right? Initially, because we were like, has Hardy had a bust up on the training ground, or is there some injury we don't know about? It turned out he was injured and he came back fairly quickly, which would suggest that it would not be Occam's razor to me would be that he is just injured somehow, and yeah, when we'll see him again.
Rooney actually mentioned in the post-match comments that Hardy was going to start that game, and then he pulled him out in the warm-up or something. So, so at least it was addressed. But as I said, his mind was elsewhere for that press conference. But yeah, it's a huge chance to. I think we just need to see a performance. We just need to see something and to build on.
Nick, come to you before we do predictions. Then we will go through question time before we end. We're already 70 minutes in. I'd planned to keep it to an hour, but there's so much crap to talk about at the moment. It's difficult to keep these shows to an hour. If without knowing obviously about, there's obviously various things going around about Morgan with his foot in a boot, and I'm not totally convinced that Hardy and Gibson were necessarily 100% fit yesterday. Personally, looking at how the game went, we obviously don't know about Such and other people. With all this in mind, I'm now going to task it with you to try and get as close to the starting 11 as humanly possible for Saturday. I mean, what sort of shape should we be looking at? Should we be going back to the 4-3-3/4-2-3-1 that we utilised so well during September and early October?
As I'm sure you're aware, I got very, very strong feelings about this. I see Oxford as the opportunity for a reset moment. If we win, and we don't even have to win convincingly, we just need to win and play like semi-well. We need to win and have been the better side. I don't think you can say that we've been the best side probably in any of the last nine games, which is what's really starting to grate. It's a good thing we haven't picked up points throughout that, but I mean, it's part of the reason why I'm not too fussed about any kind of club comms yet, because I see Oxford as the pressure of basically building this as a bit of a do or die for Rooney and for me, because I don't think it's going to tail off after that. There are sort of four things leading up to this game that I want to see. From Rooney, I want him to bring back passing out from the back. I kind of want to do a shill for my own tweet. Can I share my screen? Am I allowed to flash this up quickly? For me, it's quite a nice graph that sort of shows, in my opinion.
If you have a button that allows you to do it, then
it says
feel
present.
free.
So I'm going to go for it.
There we go.
Let me see if this is going to work. Present, share
This is
screen.
unprecedented.
Yeah,
It is.
No. It was done on
The only other time this happens is when Ben shows us the predictions league, which we haven't done since about September. But I know that I've had a better month, so I wish we could show that graphic now.
Right, let's go for this one. Can you see it? Is it? I think you have to change the setup.
Oh yeah, hang on. Let's see if we can make this work.
Oh, the big live there. I'm just gonna very, very briefly. What this is, that green dotted line, that is short passes from Grimshaw. Don't worry about the live, but you can see it well enough. Very quickly, that green dotted line. This is a 4-game rolling average, so it starts from not important. Broadly speaking, what this shows is as Grimshaw passes out from the back less, we create less. I don't think it's too hard to piece together because, from side, we don't really have that long ball approach. If we aren't building up from the back, then how are we getting into attacking positions? Broadly speaking, that's where, from my perspective, that's where we've gone wrong. That's the way I see it. I want to get back to that. Comment that says yes, graphs. I'm sure that's what the majority of people wanted to see. But I think it tells a relatively clear story, a relatively simple story. And there's quite a strong correlation there between dropping off, passing out from the back, and the creativity. I think for me, it's pretty simple. The big problem is that we can't create, and one of the big issues behind that is the passing out from the back. So that's step one. I want that back. Step two is the reason we had to drop it is because it stopped working. It stopped working because we only ever passed it through the middle. So Cardiff, Millwall, Preston, Pompey all just congested the middle, and ultimately we ended up having to either concede a lot of goals, go nowhere, or go long. So relatively simple solution for me. I want some new rotations for how we pass out from the back that involve going wide and building box midfields. And there's tweets showing 4 examples of things I would do. So that's what I want to do. I want to get back to the passing out from the back, and I want to fix the passing out from the back. That's step 1 and 2. Step 3, I want to find a way to get the best players in the team. I've started toying with the idea of playing Al-Hajj from the left, not to play as an orthodox winger, but for him to sort of drift in and find space and get Barley bombing on the overlap. We know he can play left wing, maybe not amazing. We know he can play wing back. We know he can play left back. This isn't perfect because we're dealing with quite substantial injury issues, but that's probably what I'd be thinking about doing. How can we get Al-Hajj on the pitch? How can we do it if it's not working with him in the centre and being double marked? So I'll be playing him from the left potentially, or thinking about how we can do it in a way that's going to work rather than just putting players in the team watching it not work. And ultimately, the biggest thing is really needs to get the confidence back, both in himself and the players, because part of the reason we've gone under at Norwich and Bristol is ultimately the confidence when the second one went in, they knew it was, or the third in some cases, they knew it was game over, and the effort did drop a bit. Those are the 4 things I'm looking for. So your question was for what the lineup will be. No one knows what the lineup's going to be because who saw the lineup at Bristol City coming? But the way I would do it, Grimshaw in goal, back 4, Soren right to left, Sorinola, Such hoping he's fit, otherwise it's got to be Pleguezuelo, Gibson assuming fit, and then Member on the left. I think I'll probably go Randall, JB, and either Forshaw or Wright. I don't think Wright's a great player, but he's quite good at transitioning the ball forward. It's better to have another attacking player on the pitch when we're trying to score, and he might dovetail quite nice with Al-Hajj. And I'm thinking Al-Hajj from the left, toss a coin for who you like on the right, and toss a coin for who you want up front. Because on the right we don't really have great options, and up front we've got 3 relatively good options in Gray, Hardy, and Obafemi. That's probably the way I'll be looking at it.
It is really tricky. I mean, normally when it comes around to the predictions, we normally have a vague idea of who's fit and who isn't. But given yesterday was purely, it seems, as James says, it's just throwing missiles into the dressing room at the performances we've seen in the last week, and nothing else really. We don't actually have a picture of if anybody even picked up a knock in that game yesterday. So maybe we'll have to do a little mini record on Friday once we've had Thursday's press conference. But we're still going to do score predictions. John, we haven't done our league predictions yet, so this is fresh. Nobody knows what you're about to come up with here. The final score on Saturday will be Plymouth Argyle versus Oxford. What's the final score?
Yeah, least of all myself. I'm torn between the head saying it'll be like a really frustrating 1-1 draw where like neither team is particularly good, and the heart is saying it'll be a less frustrating 2-1 victory where neither team is particularly good. You know, I'll say that we'll win. I don't think Oxford are all that. With respect to them, and I think survival would be a good thing for both teams this season. So it's the sort of game we really have to be winning at home, and I'll predict that we'll just about get the job done. 2-1.
I was just about to say, James.
I will predict. While outwardly the most pessimistic fan ever, I can't bring myself to do it here on the pod. So I will say that Rooney picks a best 4-3-3, passes out from the back, and we finish 2-0. Argyle.
Coward. Say what you really think.
Yeah, well, any form of win, I'd be delighted with.
That was it, me up. Oxford have played 8, drawn 2, lost 6. They're just as bad as us away, maybe slightly better because we're awful. They're a rung above us, but still like pretty terrible away. They're a bit like Derby in that they're and us in that they're in their position based purely on their home form. I'm gonna gamble that Rooney gets the lineup right, and that we put them away 2-1 because we all know there won't be a clean sheet. I'd rather you ask me when the lineup comes out, but I feel very confident on the lack of clean sheet.
Yeah, and I'm not sure Aaron fancies us doing a live pod at about like 2:05 on Saturday afternoon. I'm with John here. I'm a little bit torn on how this is going to go because I suspect the atmosphere around kickoff on Saturday is going to be tense, and the slightest misplaced pass or when Barley Mumba inevitably slips within the first 5 minutes and the groans go up around home park, and the rot could set in going to throw the cliche in. The first goal is absolutely massive. I hope we can get it. My fear is I don't know where it's going to come from. Even though we're at home, I mean, it took 2 bits of individual brilliance to get past Watford, didn't it, last Friday night? So, but I'm going to be positive because we are 6 unbeaten at home, and I think that we might nick it 2-1. And why not nick it from behind as well with a stoppage time winner thrown in just for good measure? Because that
So the
is
first
our
goal,
forte.
first goal won't matter at all then in that case.
Well, let's not get bogged down with the finer details of my prediction, John. Let's just stick with the positivity. Shall we? 2-1 with a late winner. Who knows? Maybe even from Victor Poulsen, as Argyle 83 suggests. We are now 80 minutes in. I'm not quite sure we're going to keep this to 90 minutes because we have a lot of questions to go through. And remarkably, there are 1,289 of you currently watching live, which is staggering. If you have joined within the last 80 minutes and you do want to catch what you've missed, because it is worth it, there's plenty been discussed, you will be able to get it on YouTube and X when we are finished. And for you audio listeners, we don't forget you. We do appreciate you just as much as those listening in and commenting. Obviously it will be available via all your usual podcast platforms. So let's get on to the questions that we have. Robin's Nest says, when are our key players expected to return? Well, Whitaker, we don't know. Such, we don't know what's wrong with him. Galloway, we've never really had a conclusive time frame. Edwards, we're expecting
Galloway's
New
we're
Year.
expecting in the next couple of weeks, aren't we? I think we
Oh,
heard
right,
that
okay.
Hazard and Galloway were slightly
like-
a few weeks behind Gibson.
I feel like Galloway's been a couple of weeks out for the last 3 months, so maybe that's just like selective hearing.
I'm not sure did you see, but I posted a quiz of how many games Galloway's missed since he joined Argyle. Do you want to quickly hazard a guess at how many games Galloway's missed through injury since he
How many
joined
has he been
Argyle?
available for?
I don't know off the top of my head, but this is 4th season.
I'm going to say he's missed
85.
55.
I was say 80.
It's
85.
87 as of Bristol City.
87.
Yeah.
That's a great guess from me.
Crikey.
Yeah.
It's a dreadful stat, is what it is. 87 games missed in 4 years.
They're
So yeah,
going down
Galloway.
year on year, though. Like literally year on year, the numbers are going down. But yeah.
And I actually, I'm one of the camp who think he may be able to make a bit of a difference to what we've got at the back as well. I think because
Don't get distracted. We're already running over enough time already.
I know. So Edwards is the new year. Sissoko's the new year. Tijani is late January. Basically, Hatch is out for the season. Hazard is any time in the next couple of weeks. I think he's on a very similar time frame to Galloway, isn't he? Who have I missed? There's bound to be somebody. Everyone seems to be injured, or is that the lot of them? Oh, and Hardy and Whitaker, as we say, we don't quite know about their. Well, we know Hardy's
Hardy
fit.
still?
But,
He started Bristol City, surely.
well, was he 100% fit? I'm not going to be not going to be sold on that. I wouldn't be too surprised if he wasn't in the squad at all at the weekend. Let's go through P321 Man 1, who is now a regular contributor on the pods, and we do enjoy his questions because he's normally pretty close to the mark. This is a genuine question, but do we have a set piece coach, as we don't score from corners or set plays, but we concede from them all the time? I personally think that the fact that we put in time on the training ground on set pieces may well be a bigger lie than investment is just around the corner that we've had out of the football club this season. Can anybody disagree with that? Because we can't defend them.
I hope they're lying, because
we can't defend from them and we can't score from them.
It'd be worse if they were telling the truth based on the available evidence on match days. This actually isn't just a Rooney thing, right? I mean, we were terrible at least at attacking set pieces last season. But yeah, I've never, we're talking about, have you ever seen a team this bad away from home or this bad after conceding the first goal? I've never seen a team this bad in both boxes at set pieces. It is extraordinary. We look utterly inept at defending our own box from set pieces, and utterly clueless. It's like the cross at the other end. It's like the cross is just being slung in there, and it's like on FIFA, right? You sort of like press X really hard and hope that someone will get their head on it. It's terrible.
I actually watched watched the Bristol City game on Bristol City TV, and they commented in the halftime that they hadn't seen any team as more woeful at set pieces than them.
The answer to the question, by the way, we don't have an official set piece coach, but it was mentioned in a press conference that a coach has responsibility for it. I believe that's Simon Ireland, he was a first team coach, who was a set piece coach before he joined us. I mean, for me, if we're talking about data-driven decision making, I look at the I did a thread in it. I can't find it because the numbers are honestly they're appalling. They're absolutely. We scored from one corner since we came back to the Championship, and that was Whittaker's intricate setup against Swansea. The last headed goal from a corner was Gillespie against Bristol Rovers in the 2-0 win. Matt Butcher swinging. That's the last time we scored a headed goal from a corner. And like the numbers in terms of the percentage that we actually get first contact on or that we get a shot up on, they are terrible when you compare us versus our opponents. For me, when I think about data-driven decisions, surely hiring an out-and-out set-piece coach is, in terms of cost to points delivered, both in terms of fewer goals conceded and more goals scored, if done correctly, of course, surely that's got to be worth it. I just don't see how that isn't. That's a gold mine in terms of a small investment leading to a huge change in points. But then maybe it wouldn't work if we had someone technically in charge of it who was a set piece coach before. Why would a new set piece coach change that? I don't know.
After the Football Content Awards, I stayed in London for a couple of days, so I had the pleasure of Sky Sports coverage of the Watford game. And Gary Weaver is a very, very good commentator. He brings the EFL to life, and he's great at what he does. I was in fits of laughter every time we had a set piece against Watford because he relentlessly mentioned that Lewis Gibson was coming up from the back and he's such a threat from these. And I just couldn't help but laugh that we just don't score from set pieces. And what makes it worse is that we're awful now at defending them as well. Here's one that a lot of people have mentioned tonight. Jack mentions it in his comment, and Rob mentions it as well. So I'll read them out for the audio listeners. Can we just mention that we've had no player interviews after the last two games? All want to come out and speak when we're playing well, but not when they don't, says Jack. And Rob says, what could be the reason players are not doing post-match interviews lately? Not sure anyone else has noticed it. Well, I think quite a few people have noticed it after yesterday in particular. Anyone have any strong thoughts as to why? Are the players being protected after being thrown under the bus by the manager?
My strong supposition, keeping in mind Nick's point that he said earlier, that we can't really assess what's going on behind the scenes because we don't exactly know, is that the club media team or the management or whoever are protecting them from having to go out and kind of bear the brunt of it. And the decision is that the manager will go out and speak for everyone, is my guess. I really, really strongly doubt that this is no players actually are putting their hands up or want to do it, and they only want to talk in kind of fairer weather, as it were. I'd also note that, to be fair, both JB and Forshaw did interviews in between the Norwich and Bristol City games, right? So that there were players who addressed both of those. The Norwich game before the Bristol City game, that just didn't do so in the immediate aftermath. And I thought that Forshaw's comments, I thought they both spoke well, but I thought Forshaw's comments in particular about sort of heads going down too quickly and needing to keep heads up and sort of even just try and keep goal difference down in those sorts of environments were quite good comments. And I find it very hard to believe that he in particular, I think having actually modelled that kind of behaviour yesterday, would not have then come out and sort of talked about it if that was what the club had decided to do. So I suspect this is a media team / management decision, not anything that reflects badly on the players. And I'm equally sure that we will hear from one or two of them ahead of the Oxford game, and the last two results will be addressed, and they'll have their opportunity to talk about it.
That's probably true, but I want them to come out and speak anyway. Let me put it this way: if that were the case, and the media team didn't want to come out, Joe Edwards would still come out and talk anyway. He'd overrule them. Let's be honest. We know there's a lack of leadership on the pitch. It's a very young team, and it's it's a very new team as well, the one that was actually playing. When you look at who's in the team, there's not many people who've been here for a while and are. Who is it really? Hardy is probably the only person there who's both been here a while and is over the age of like 24, 25-ish.
Houghton would have been the other one from
really
yesterday's starting lineup, wouldn't he?
Sorry?
Houghton would have been from yesterday's starting lineup.
Yeah, Houghton, yeah. I mean, there aren't many. I'm really concerned that we lack leaders. I still have flashbacks to that. I think it was the second Leeds goal where no one goes to engage the players in our box. No one goes to engage them. Houghton and Forshaw both should be absolutely charging towards it. I've got a long list of things I want fixing. Lack of leaders is a big concern. Yet it's still nowhere near the top 3. But the fact that no player, I agree that I think it's a media decision. Let Rooney front it. It might have even been a Rooney decision to front it up. But I still want the players. I want to see some of these younger players in particular emerge as leaders and just say, no, I'm going to go out there and give the interview in the way we know that Edwards would as a leader. So yeah, I see it both ways, but I want a bit more from the players as well, particularly someone like Gibson, captain material, Randall, captain material. I don't see Barley as captain material, but I still want him. He's been here this is his 3rd season now. I want him to sort of step up and say, yeah, I'll face the media.
One of the comments that came along the lines of Simon Ireland being the set piece coach was that he was also the similar job at Huddersfield and they didn't score from a single corner whilst
I think that is correct. Yeah, I remember looking that up
on the staff there. James, I don't know whether this was tongue-in-cheek from Robin's Nest, but data-wise, I'd imagine we're probably going to be able to back this up. Are we better than Rotherham last season? I mean, the fact that we're out of the bottom 3 and we're keeping our heads above water suggests that we probably are. But are the way the performance is trending at the moment suggesting that perhaps Rotherham 23-24 could be Plymouth 24-25, or are we better than that?
Given that I don't have any of the relevant information in front of me, and I'm going to start answering the question anyway, I think you probably want to start defining better.
Can I read out Rotherham's away record?
Do you want to do this statistically better? And I might argue that yeah.
So I'm just going to quickly read out Rotherham's away record last season. 23 played, 0 wins, 4 draws, 19 losses, 13 scored, 61 conceded, negative 48 goal difference. We're probably on par away.
Ouch.
Do we know? Surely we're ahead of them on points at this stage of the season.
At this stage, well, I mean, we're getting towards in about 3 or 4 games' time, we'll be points per game probably level.
This time last season, I had a look at this earlier. This time last season, we were 1 place higher in the table and we had 2 points more than we do currently.
I think that's really interesting. I saw that stat as well, and it comes down to the idea, I guess, of resulting, where we can look at the points the results of each game, and say about and take that as a marker of whether we are better or worse. But then we can also look at our underlying data and what we see with our eyes. And I would say that we are worse than ourselves substantially, and Rotherham, I would say at this juncture. I think even if we are on more points at this point, I think really it comes down to that grabbing points from last minute winners where we've been last minute draws and at home, and even a winner when we've been atrocious. Perhaps is looking beyond the result and looking at our performances, because if you go from the argument about long-term data is that over a very, very, and anyone last season, just a perfect example of a very, very endlessly long 46 game season, you will revert to your baseline stat at some point, and you'll run out of luck. So it's whether we're worse than Rotherham. We'd have to pull up the data on our underlying stats, and I would presume that we are worse.
I think we're pretty comfortably better than that Rotherham team. I don't think like a 1-to-1 data comparison across 2 different seasons is going to be.
I think we have the potential to be, but I bet they don't look as bad on the eye as we do right now.
Sure, but okay, I've got it up here. They won 5 games last season. So in order to be as bad as them on that one metric, we would have to win only one more game for the entire rest of the season. We've literally
You can
all
make the
sat here pretty
comparison
much.
away, but we're definitely better than Rotherham overall. Away from home, you can make a comparison. Overall, no, we're miles clear of Rotherham. They only ended up with 27 points. We're already on 17, aren't we?
We're on the danger, though. I probably overblown the case of forgetting how bad Rotherham were last season, but slightly. But at the same time, you could take quite a few of our points over the last this last 9 game section and actually say that we didn't deserve it, the points that we got. So, okay, but from a XGA differential point of view, I would be surprised if we were turning in better performances than Rotherham.
2 questions left, and then we are done for the night. Chris Matthews asks, Chris Matthews 16 on YouTube even asks, Netflix or no Netflix, can anyone see Rooney surviving if we lose to Oxford? If home results dry up, then hard to argue for him to stay. I think me and John are both aligned in our thinking here, aren't we? That, you know, a lot hinges on the next 2 games. But I can't see them pulling the trigger after Saturday alone, unless it's like a 6-0 drubbing, surely.
There is a close to 100% chance that Wayne Rooney will be our manager for the Swansea game, in my opinion. I think the only doubt I have about that is if he somehow decided to walk out because, I don't know, we've lost 6-0 and he's been barracks and he just has a moment of clarity and decides he doesn't need it. He can just go on Neville and Keane's podcast instead, right? You know, like I think that a number of things. I actually think, again, don't want to speculate too much. My guess is that Hallett probably thinks that the negativity is enormously overblown. The fans are being entitled whingers like they were with Foster. That actually our form is fine in the sense that, you know, we've not lost 3 of the last 5 games. This is not sacking form, that it's earlier in the season than with Foster, so there's less of a kind of break glass in case of emergency case for it. That we don't want to be like other clubs, right? And other clubs sack managers as soon as they have a couple of bad results or face a spot of adversity. That there is an enormous injury list that's a huge mitigating factor. That it's a bad run of form, and that they need to stick by him. That my guess, based on everything Hallett has ever said publicly about our managerial situation, is that is what he is thinking, and it's going to have to get significantly worse in terms of, like, maybe not in terms of individual performances, because the last 2 have been about as bad as it can possibly get, but, you know, in terms of consecutive losses, fan pressure. You know, if we lose every game between now and January 1st, I could see him maybe getting sacked after that Bristol City game on New Year's Day, which incidentally is, I think, when he was sacked by Birmingham last year, albeit obviously he wasn't the manager there at the beginning of the season, but he was sacked around that kind of time. But I think we would have to lose close to all of those games, you know, and or pick up a couple of points here and there, but just get tonked 7-8-0 or whatever in the others. My assumption is Hallett wants to give this time and thinks probably that this is something that can be turned around when we start getting a bit more luck on the injury front and all the rest of it. So, yeah, whatever the fans are saying, I wouldn't prepare for Rooney to be going anywhere after the Oxford game. I also, as I've said, I don't think he'll be going anywhere after the Swansea game either, but I think I would probably put the chance of him being sacked after the Swansea game marginally higher than it would after the Oxford game. The latter, sorry, I just can't see it happening at all.
The difference as well with someone like him, Foster, is the pressure level. That was crunch time, end of the season, very, very short. It was 6 games for Dusnip to turn it around. And really, the moment it turned was over Easter, when we wanted to go with 8 games to go, so we wouldn't waste that 2 week off. It's not the same with Rooney. We're both outside the relegation zone. It's all his doing, whereas with Foster, it was a case that Schumacher's built you this lead and you're losing the lead, so he hadn't banked any kind of goodwill. And it was the pressure at the end of the season. We've got the injuries to come back. We've got January transfer window and in theory, a wedge of money to spend, a wedge relative for someone like Argyle. And for me, I think it's not that he gets stacked with lose to Oxford. I think it's the beginning of the end, because so many fans will flip that mental switch. And once you flip that switch, you don't unflip it. You can sort of revert, but the next time there's a run, you don't get that grace again. Like, you notice how we've been on a pretty crap run now, and we've had some real heavy defeats. We're only just starting to talk about Rooney out. The next time this happens, the pressure will build quicker, more people will turn quicker, and that's really the danger here. He needs to be Oxford to sort of prevent that kind of mass turn, which is where Foster went wrong. Once you lose the majority of the fans, you don't get them back long term. It's just a postponement if you can get some good results, really.
One thing just quickly that I do not believe, and this goes to Chris Matthews' question, I personally do not believe for 1 second that the alleged Netflix contract that means we can't sack him or whatever is a real thing. I just think this is the club are going to act in their own business interest. And if the business interest is we're going down, we need to sack him, I don't think they're going to let a Netflix documentary get in the way of that. I've heard that argument bandied around. I just don't buy it. One thing that will be interesting to me, to Nick's point, is to hear when the fans in the ground really vocally turn on Rooney, because I haven't massively heard that yet. I mean, for at least 4 or 5 games prior to Foster being sacked, there were chants of Ian Foster, your football is excrement, or even Ian Foster, get out of our club. Right? It was really personal. I didn't go to the Preston home game.
There were boos as well after West Brom, right? As I recall,
and that was what, 2 months before he got sacked, like a month and a half. Maybe it was certainly he got sacked in April, and that game was in February. So it was, we're talking in terms of months plural, right? With Rooney, the loud booing at Norwich, loud booing at Bristol City, chance of this is embarrassing, you're not fit to wear the shirt, not chance of we want Rooney out or Wayne Rooney get out of our club that I could hear. I've heard that expressed as an opinion from individual fans yelling it or whatever. Like I don't think that's like a critical mass of supporters in the ground actually think that yet. So I think based on last time, and especially to Nick's point, which I think is absolutely correct, that that was a much more pressurized point of the season where it's getting to the point where you just can't take the gamble that things will turn up. And also given that we're not even in the relegation zone at the moment, let alone cut adrift, I think the gap between those first chants of Rooney out and him actually getting sacked and the board actually listening will be longer than it was last time. And last time it was, again, 5 or 6 games, right? So I don't think you're looking at this happening anytime soon, realistically. And by the way, I should just say, I did mention, and certainly was saying yesterday in anger, that if we lose the next 2, I'll start to maybe turn. I don't think that Hallett's, sort of my imagined Hallett's view, Hallett's case for this is totally unreasonable. I do think that sacking culture has gone too far in football. I do think there are legitimate mitigating factors going on at the moment. I'm not, I think if we do lose the next 2, for me, it's going to be very hard for him to come back from that. But I don't think that it's particularly reasonable for people to be absolutely certain and convinced that he deserves to be sacked after 2 back-to-back defeats, however abysmal they were, right? There is a reasonable case for giving him a month or 2 more, at least. Again, whether I think you could obviously disagree with that case. I'm not saying that you're necessarily
counter case is January. Counter case is January. That month takes you into the transfer window. And and we saw how difficult it is to do that and pivoting strategy mid-season. I'm sorry, James, you haven't had a chance to go.
I think part of the problem is with Foster that the car crash was played out at Home Park, where our home form was just absolutely embarrassing. But actually, his better performances were out of the larger field of view away from home. While really, obviously, has got the opposite point of view and a pretty damn good home record without having just looking at the results, one that stands up. So while that continues, I can't see him being in morbid danger. The thing that nags at the back of my mind is whether a change is made due to other people being available rather than the beliefs of manager sackings on their own.
I wonder whom you may be referring to. Final one of the night then, because we've been here a long time. Paul Burke. It's not really a question, really. It's just a thought. Out of curiosity, is looking through Greens on screen earlier for the last pair of league games that were worse, and I think it's 1960 to 61 where we lost 9-0 and 6-4 in a row. Can you think of any worse pair of results than that? I mean, there's obviously been seasons where we will have put in 2 really bad losses back to back, but a 6-1 and a 4-0 is certainly going to take some topping, isn't it? I mean, there's certainly nothing jumping off the top of my head heavy.
Sam's the one you want for this.
It is. I know he's
I can think of the English, the 4-0 and 5-0 League to Fleetwood and Morecambe. Like that was pretty good. But I have no idea on the worse.
There'll be something in there somewhere, won't there? Like, what was the result that immediately followed or was before the 6-6? Was it 6-0 or 6-1 to Charlton during lockdown season? I mean, there will
That
obviously
was
be.
5. I suppose no, actually, you'd probably go for not in 2 games, but that season earlier in the season, that run of 6 losses, wasn't it? Like 5-1 Fleetwood, 4-5-0 Peterborough, 4-0 Rochdale. Hang on, let me get that. Like that.
I think we only lost 1-0 to Posh in that run. I remember a game at Crewe where Lowe decided to play a back four entirely of centre backs, and we were terrible for 45 minutes. We only lost the game 2-1 in the end, but that was like a much worse performance than the scoreline indicated. It's probably the most damning indictment here is that the immediate example coming to mind is the next worst 2 games in a row is Cardiff and Millwall from this season.
I really want to get involved in Paul Burke's question because I'm pretty sure I went to school with Paul Burke. But my one that jumped to my mind was obviously the Accrington 5-1, and then I checked that the previous result was losing 3-0 at home to Barnsley. So I don't know, feels pretty up there.
Yeah, that was a season where it spiraled out of control amazingly well, given Derek Adams up to that point had a perfectly good steer of the ship. Well, that's an hour and 45. I think that's long enough. We've tried to spread as much positivity as we can in the last 45 minutes, but then obviously we did come to question time, and unfortunately all the questions were starred in the first hour of the program. If you have missed it, as mentioned, do go back, catch it on X, YouTube. We are now on Blue Sky as well, so do catch all our thoughts on there as well. All that's left for me to say, Nick and James, pleasure having you back on the pod. I'm sure this won't be the last we see of you both this year. John, as always, pleasure. I'm not quite sure. Neither of us are on at the weekend after Oxford. I'm not quite sure who is on this weekend, but I'm not, so I don't really care. Thank you very much for joining us. Over 1,450 and more have joined this evening. It's been a great hour 45's discussion. So thank you very much. And we will see you again next weekend after hopefully another successful home result. But for now, keep the faith, for Christ's sake. You'll only make yourself annoyed if you don't. See you next week.